This is Vibe Science, a top 100 wellness podcast presented by the Radcast Network, breaking wellness barriers and making health truly personal. Here are your hosts, Ryan Alford and Chris Hansen.
Hello, and welcome to Vibe Science, where we say, in health and wellness, there should be no alternatives. We believe in holistic approaches, mind, body, spirit. We believe in supplementation to modern medicine and bringing to light all that is good with alternative wellness. With that in mind, Chris Hansen, my co-host, is in Miami. What's up, Chris?
What's up, Brian? How are you, brother?
I'm wonderful, man. I'm pumped because we've got the co-founder and CEO of Nushama, Jay Godfrey. What's up, Jay?
What's up, gentlemen? How are you?
Couldn't be better. If it, I'd be on something illegal if it was any better.
No need for that. No need for that. Although I've heard they're good. There's plenty of legal options available.
No, I'm excited. You know, this is a field that I'm aware at a high level, but I know very little. If that makes any sense. Like, I know there's all these things out there, and as we learn and bring to light all of these alternatives, and I hate the word alternative. You know, we say that, and that's what we're trying to make. They're really, in making yourself well and in personal wellness, there really should be no alternatives. It should just be, what does it take to make me well from top to bottom? You know, and it doesn't all happen in a lab. It also doesn't all happen, you know, at a doctor's office. So it's holistic, right?
You know, we have to take back agency. We have to take back, I don't want to use the word control because that's a loaded one, but we have to make the decisions and take responsibility for our own wellness. And it's something that's alternative now, will become mainstream someday. You know, if you look at music, for example, you know, there were times where Led Zeppelin or the Rolling Stones were considered the type of music that you shouldn't listen to. That's dangerous. Their ideas are nuts. And of course, now it's, you know, Apple is paying for their songs to be on their television commercials. So what was once abhorrent, scary, ridiculous, alternative is now mainstream. And I fully expect psychedelic medicine to be the mainstream within 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's coming. And it's a shame that it's taken this long, especially, and I know we're going to talk about all the benefits that it can have, you know, in a controlled, highly therapeutic environment. And so, you know, no one's promoting, you know, going in your backyard and not knowing what you're doing or no, therapeutic, like, professionals, like, doing legitimate science and work towards your wellness and discovery. And so I know we're going to get into that, but that's the soapbox we're preaching from. You know, we're in the pulpit.
Love it.
So, Jay, let's set the table. What's Nushama and who is Jay Godfrey? Right. Let's give everybody a little background.
Right. So I do what I had a very normal, plain vanilla career. Actually, I'm a Canadian, born and raised in Toronto, Canada. I actually moved to New York City, where I reside now, to become an investment banker. And of course, I left investment banking because it was torture. And I felt like I wasn't creating anything. And somehow I landed myself as a women's wear fashion designer, which makes no sense, but I did. I went to design school and I wanted to try something creative. And I had this really quite amazing career for 15 years in fashion. But something still wasn't right. And about 2015, I started going to talk therapy. And I should set the stage a little bit. Talk therapy, when I was a kid, was what my parents threatened me with if I didn't behave. So it wasn't, you know, we weren't one of those families where you share your feelings or, you know, the word trauma ever came up. And look, I had a really good childhood, but you know, talk therapy and sharing your feelings just weren't a thing. I grew up in a home of 3 boys, and we would, beat the shit out of each other and do very boy-like things. But here I was, 2015, running my fashion business in talk therapy every single week in New York City, where the best therapists really aren't covered by insurance. I'm paying $300. So you do simple math, 15 grand a year, did it for 3 years. I spent $45,000 in talk therapy. And in about 2018, I started thinking to myself, what has, I'm $45,000 poorer right now. I've dedicated hundreds of hours to talk therapy. And where am I? If I did an inventory, if I told myself or asked myself honestly, where am I at? I wasn't very much further along. I had some strategies, I had some coping mechanisms. My therapist remains to this day, although I don't see her anymore, a great therapist. So what was the problem, guys? Well, really simple. I was not a good patient. Why wasn't I a good patient? My ego was so entrenched. I was so addicted to my story, to my victimhood, to seeing things through the lens of not good enough, of scarcity. And that was very, very tough for me. So no matter what I told my therapist, there was no healing to be had there. And in about 2018, as I'm doing this personal inventory, I read, I'm an avid reader, but I read the book How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And it's really becomes a Bible of sorts for anybody interested in psychedelic therapy. And it talks about how, in the 50s and 60s, they were using these psychedelic medicines, LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, these different psychedelic compounds to treat what the medical system today would call psychiatric indications like depression, anxiety, PTSD, maybe even addictions. But what people in shamanic cultures 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years ago would just call ailments of the spirit. And despite not ever trying any drugs in my life, I was introduced to plant medicine shortly thereafter. And I started doing this work in 2019 where I work with plant medicine, and I discovered in my journeys that not only is the story of me not being good enough bullshit, it was total bullshit. And I saw where it came from, and it wasn't anybody's fault. It was a choice that I made when I was a child as a reaction to something that happened in the outside world. And during my plant medicine experiences in June 2020, I decided during COVID that fashion industry wasn't what people wanted anymore. People weren't buying women's dresses. They were wearing sweatpants at home. So here I was in June 2020, my fashion business going right into the shit, and I was okay. I was totally okay. In fact, I was better than I ever was. And I felt chosen to do this work. And I felt that I'd already built a great brand in fashion. And my second mountain was really about bringing these medicines in a legal framework so that people who are suffering, and people during COVID who are really suffering, and there still are, into the legal, medically supervised context. So we started Nushama with my 2 partners. Nushama is a legal psychedelic therapy clinic based in New York City. And we administer ketamine for the moment. And as the legal framework for psilocybin and MDMA loosen up and they become legal FDA-approved medicines, we will administer those as well for PTSD and depression, anxiety, and a number of other psychiatric indications.
Thank you for that, Jay. I have this epiphany, like when we have guests on and we start having these discussions, and like, I feel like for whatever reason, and like you said, in the 50s and 60s, these things were being tested and advanced, and no different than hundreds of years ago, these plant-based medicines that were used to treat a lot of different conditions. These solutions and or the research and everything behind them got locked into a box, and we've been conditioned to think that they are the naughty box. And it's a real travesty, that we're just now getting enlightened on these things and advancing them. I just can't quite even grasp my head around why that happened. And I mean, I know it's probably a dollars and cents thing. Let's be honest, like pharmaceuticals and all these changes. But what's your perspective on why these things have been in these lock boxes for so long?
Yeah, Ryan, if I may, the lock boxes that's a great term for it, because imagine taking something that's so valuable and locking it away from public consumption. And the reason this happened, really, you go back to the 60s and kind of the Woodstock era. And you saw how people then were taking molecules like psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and LSD, and nobody wanted to go to war. Nobody wanted to be drafted after they took these molecules. People wanted peace and love and harmony. And while that sounds nice to each of us, imagine you're a government that you're trying to recruit people for the fight in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've got tens of thousands of young men and women saying, no, I'm good. All I want is peace and love. So it became a threat to the military industrial complex. And people were starting to also get an idea that it was also a threat to what people would call today the pharma industrial complex. America's pharma industry was built upon a pill for an ill, treat the symptom, and make sure they're on that pill every day. That's how money is made. So in the early 70s, the president at the time, Richard Nixon, didn't want any of this hippie stuff, didn't want peace, love, and harmony. So he started the drug war. And the drug war was the Controlled Substances Act. And it basically said psilocybin, not MDMA at the time, but psilocybin, LSD, all the psychedelic medicines, in addition to the really dangerous stuff like heroin and methamphetamine and cocaine, which are actually dangerous or can be dangerous drugs, they got put in the same basket with psychedelics, which are non-addictive and can be helpful, and they lump them into this kind of Schedule 1 status. And that was incredibly unfortunate. And not only was it unfortunate, the US government put billions upon billions upon billions, tens of billions of dollars promoting this falsehood that psychedelics are addictive and they're dangerous. And what we're finding out now is that is false. And slowly that glacier, that misinformation is kind of thawing as people are looking for new solutions.
If you circle anything, folks, we're gonna earmark that discussion right there, because I think
You read my mind.
Yeah, Jay, you just we've asked a lot of people and we've heard different answers, and I know some of that, but that was a masterclass in why this has happened. And so I want to thank you for that. That's going to be like, we're gonna have that like at the top of the website, like as the reason why these things took place. The irony of all of that, as I sit there and listen to you talk, Jay, is the wars that we fight now, that aren't necessarily, don't get me wrong, I believe in the U.S. and all that, and we got to fight some nasty wars with some nasty people on the ground. But the irony is a lot of the wars that are taking place are happening at computers and or, on children's playgrounds with, and I'm a gun advocate, but the right people having the right guns, and hurt people. And
That's right.
We've locked these solutions potentially to helping hurt people get better. And so it's backfiring now in the modern world that these things are locked away.
That's correct. And hurt people do hurt people. Happy people don't. It's very, very obvious. So, without even kind of wading into the whole gun debate and look, in Canada, it's a whole different story. Here in the US, I'll actually say I understand everybody's point of view. But 100% of the people who go into a place and shoot people have issues that the current system have not addressed.
That's
a fact.
That's the point.
Yeah.
And I would venture to argue, this might be a little bit controversial, that most of those people, and I don't know if this is true, and I've heard certain presidential candidates mention this, that a disproportionate amount of the school shooters actually are hopped up on a number of psychiatric medications. And that is troubling because those are the same psychiatric medications that Big Pharma wants to keep selling, and that the same companies are the ones that want to keep these psychedelic medicines that you do not have to be on for life. They do not have long-term side effects or even short-term side effects outside of the time that you're in your kind of journey or treatment or experience. That those companies want to keep psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, ayahuasca, ibogaine, and even ketamine, which is currently legal and effective, but they want to keep the distribution as limited as possible.
Yeah. I mean, it needs to be regulated. There's no question about that. But the studies and the results and things that I know you're seeing daily are too strong for the positive effects for when this is done therapeutically the right way. And Jay, I'd love for you to talk, for our listeners, and then, Chris, I'll let you add some thoughts here, but I would love for Jay to kind of talk through what happens at Nushama. What's the experience? Like, I think there's even me, I'm here to take notes, like mentally. I know enough to be dangerous, but like what happens in a ketamine, therapy treatment center, and what's that experience?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's still a big black box for people, especially in light of the fact that the press is so focused on sensationalism versus truth telling.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a different topic for a different day. Wow. But what happens in a ketamine treatment center? Well, people come to us and they'll come through our website and they'll say, you know what? I have depression, or I have PTSD, or I have anxiety, and I can't function. And most of these people are what you would call treatment resistant, people who've tried antidepressants or anti-anxieties or antipsychotics, and it hasn't worked for them. And so these treatment resistant folks come, and first step is they'll have what's called a medical intake with one of our doctors. And it's psychiatric intake as well. And it either diagnoses them or reconfirms a diagnosis that another medical provider has provided, and really screens them to determine, is this a safe treatment for you? I will tell you, ketamine is an extraordinarily safe medication. So safe that in every single pediatric operating room where a child is put under, i.e. anesthetized, they use ketamine at 4, 6, 8 times the doses that we use for a psychedelic experience. And it's the standard in American operating theaters for children. But there are a couple things that, if you've got extraordinarily high blood pressure that's uncontrolled, if you've got certain thyroid issues, and if you're schizophrenic, ketamine is really not a safe option for you. However, outside of those kind of 3 major contraindications, most people, it's a very, very safe option for. And once they get cleared by the medical professional to determine that it is a safe treatment for you, we have a protocol of 6 sessions. Those 6 treatments are delivered via an IV, and it's done usually over a 3-week period. When you come into the center, most people are pretty surprised. It doesn't feel like a doctor's office. There's no lab coats. There's no stethoscopes. We don't want people to feel sick. People aren't, we've over-diseasified in the United States mental health conditions. People are not suffering from a biological disease when they have depression. They're not suffering from a disease when they've got anxiety. They're suffering from being human. Something's happened and they haven't been able to let it go. This facilitates that. So when people come in, they get another assessment to make sure that, they didn't go drink the night before, or that they don't have other substances on them. They get hooked up to an IV, and then the therapist comes in the room. And what's so important, guys, about psychedelic therapy is many people think it's about the drug. They think it's about the ketamine, or they think soon it'll be about the psilocybin or MDMA when it becomes legal. And it is, but it's only 10% about the drug. It's only 10% actually about the diagnosis. So what's the other 80%? The other 80% is what's wrapped around the treatment. The set and the setting. And the set refers to the mindset of the person going into the experience. And the setting refers to the place that they're doing it in. So this center at Nushama is conducive to doing a psychedelic journey where there's two real big things happening. Number one, the psychedelic, in this case ketamine, is creating what's called neuroplasticity. That means connections in your brain that have either never connected before or haven't connected since you were a child are firing. So if you ever see an MRI of a brain on a psychedelic, you see it's just lit up with all these new connections. That neuroplastic effect is not an argument to be had. You can see it if somebody's in an MRI machine on a psychedelic, and it is proven with scientific fact to have an antidepressant effect. So what's this business about something else happening? Well, during the experience, you go through something called ego dissolution. So what it does is it quiets a little switch in your brain in an area of the brain called the default mode network. And the default mode network is the center of your brain that looks at your judgments, your stories, the meaning that you attach to things, when you're explaining your point of view, your desire to be right, all the things that make up your ego. And it quiets it to the point where you, during your treatment, experience something. For many people who are traumatized and have depression or PTSD because maybe they've been on the battlefields of Iraq or Afghanistan, or they've been experienced abuse as a child, all the stories that are connected to that trauma fall away. And they get to observe it and often re-experience it without the stories, without the judgments, without the opinions. And they can see it for what it is. And oftentimes, when they meet with the therapist immediately following the treatment, they come to their own conclusion that as an adult, it no longer serves them to be attached to the story of their trauma, and they can let it go. And that's why treatments like this, with integration and preparation and therapy before and after the treatment, done with intention in the right setting, really, really work.
Wow. That's fascinating. How many treatments is it like a one and done, or is it multiple sessions with the ketamine?
Yeah, for ketamine, the protocol is 6 treatments over 3 weeks.
Okay.
So you do 2 a week. And then what typically happens, the data shows this, is that people will have a statistically meaningful change in their diagnosis. For example, we just did the largest retrospective study for PTSD ever done with ketamine. But what was different about our study is we did it with reverence towards set and setting, towards preparation and integration. And so we had 117 people with major PTSD come through our program. And they went through the 6 sessions. They had their preparation sessions. They had their integration therapy sessions. And what happened? 70+% of these people, almost 3/4 actually, had a statistically meaningful reduction in their PTSD. And about 61% of these people had no diagnosis at all. So I want to bump that up against one of our biggest problems, because as somebody who really, really values and loves the men and women who dress up, who wear the uniform of the United States of America, the VA spends $17 billion per annum just in cash disability payments to people who've gone to war with PTSD. We just did a study where 6 of every 10 of those people who can go through 6 treatments over 3 weeks, 6 of every 10 of those people will not have a diagnosis after.
I mean, we should literally be putting them into this the moment they come back and they have any symptom of PTSD.
It should be standard. It should be standard of care.
Yeah. Maybe standard of care, whether they have it or not, if they've gone through any trauma. Like,
indeed.
Yeah. The government should be subsidizing it, like paying you guys directly, you know?
Well, you said earlier, I totally agree with you, by the way. And I'm not saying that because I'm looking for a government handout.
No.
It's not. But what I would say is that I ride the subway to work every single day in New York City, and all you need to do is look around the train. And you see what I would call profound trouble and upset written on people's faces, in their body language, even in the energy that they're emitting. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, the solutions that our medical system have been offering and peddling for years are insufficient. And so it's time for something new. And I think this is one great tool amongst many others that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I've ridden those same trains. It does. You look around and you see it, and it's anywhere you go, like, you know it and you feel it, and people are coming to their senses about the mental health crisis and that we have, and I don't like we talked about like sensationalizing and headlines and all that, but it is a crisis with the amount of people that are suffering with depression and everything else. And because you can't, and that's why, what we're trying to do with this show, like, you can't get your body right if your mind isn't right. So, it's always been about treating the issue, but how do we prevent the issues? How do we, holistic wellness is about mind, body, spirit, but it's about conditioning and doing things and removing barriers to things that can help us avoid pitfalls that are going to arise as humans. Like you said, we're all going to go through these things. And so we've got to free up the ability to get access to this stuff. Chris, I'll let you chime in here.
I got no words. I mean, Jay, you're speaking in such a great way explaining this. Like I said, I've never done ketamine therapy. It's been, talked about. I've experimented with the plant medicines and that. And it sounds similar in an aspect to how you describe it, because it's so hard to describe. And I think you do it beautifully. If I had no experience, I think you explain it in a way that's digestible for your average person, because even it took those experiences for me were similar. If I'm walking around town, I can see that low energy I just feel, I look around and I see people struggling, hurting, anxious, depressed. But I'm glad you brought on the veterans, because that was what swayed me into wanting to try the psychedelics was, and I thought about it earlier when we were talking about the military industrial complex. It's like the same government that's wanting these young guys to go over and fight these wars is the same one restricting the real access to the actual medicine for when they do come back. And I saw a lot of my friends went to Iraq and Afghanistan and came back and definitely had problems. And it wasn't until they leaned into these, holistic approaches and the plant medicine, the ketamine therapies, where there was profound changes in actual healing, and like you described, my experience, psychedelics, same thing. I went back and witnessed these events, these times in my life, completely detached, and I was okay with them, similar to me. I don't need to live those stories of me when I was 12 or whatever it is. It's just such an exciting time. And because I was not like you, I had played with drugs and stuff, but psychedelics to me were always a big no-no. Like, I like to be in control. I'm not a hippie. I'm a business guy. All the propaganda, right, that I had fed into from the government and the movies or whatever. And it was one of those things after dinner, I'm like, God, I wish I would have done this years ago, man. Like, just relieve. Like, I encourage anyone listening, look into the ketamine therapies or these psychedelic therapies. It's like, it changed my life, completely changed my life. And I mean, if I could choose any one thing to focus on right now, it would be psychedelic in the mental health space. I think there's such impact, like you said, the next 5 years, and that excites me because, you know, my previous career, I was selling pharmacogenetic testing to a lot of psychiatric practitioners for people that were on psychiatric and antidepressants. And we were trying to help people find the right medications earlier on instead of doing all this experimenting. But even that, it's like so much of that can be removed if we look at these other treatments. I think it's just a wonderful, beautiful thing. And I'm glad we got guys like you on our side with it, because you speak about it in a way that's very, like I said, digestible. For a very deep thing that's hard to talk about, you put it in a way that I think can get the message out to the widespread audience.
And I think it's important because, you know, when you start looking at the numbers, they're scary. The United States is the most highly medicated country in the world. Just looking at antidepressants, just that one class of SSRIs, SNRIs, 11% of Americans, greater than 1 of every 10, are on one. That's not the scary statistic. The scarier one is only 1 of every 3 Americans who's depressed is on them. Meaning, if there's 11% of the country that's on them and only 1 of every 3 depressed, it means 1/3 of the country is depressed. And that doesn't touch PTSD, doesn't include addiction. So you've got greater than 40% of the country struggling. And they're struggling because they can't get out of bed in the morning. They're struggling because, you know, this ailment of the spirit or this psychiatric indication is debilitating them to such a degree that it is manifesting itself as physical sicknesses. You know, people ask the question, why is there so much chronic disease? Why is there so much violence? Why is there so much addiction? Well, if people look in the mirror and seeing what they're doing to themselves, and I've heard medical doctors say to me, Jay, what are you talking about? How does having anxiety or depression manifest itself as disease? Well, it's very simple, guys. Depression, or as some people in New York like to call it, I'm stressed. So what is stress? Stress is, there's a chemical release called cortisol, which I'm sure you guys know something about. Cortisol creates, in all cases, inflammation. And inflammation is the gateway to every single disease known to mankind. So, stress can create disease. But the good news is the reduction of stress, the reduction of depression, the reduction of anxiety, the reduction of addiction can also free you from disease. And this is why I feel so strongly that ketamine therapy in the here and now, but MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy in the future, when the FDA approves it, is not going to be last resort treatment, which is you're standing on the edge of the building ready to kill yourself, or drinking 20 drinks a day and getting cirrhosis of the liver, or that you can't get out of bed because you're unfunctional. This is going to be where people are like, you know what? I don't want to get to treatment resistance. I don't want to get where I'm prescribed 5 psychiatric medications and I've got to pay my therapist $300 a week and my psychiatrist or psychopharmacologist $250 every 2 weeks just to renew my prescription. We've got to get people back into balance, and back into balance means, and this is a little woo-woo, but people back into their hearts and out of their heads, out of the anxiety and into faith. And that is a big part of what psychedelic medicine does almost for everybody across the board.
What's the future of Nushama? You know, like what's your growth plans? What's ambitions, etc.?
So we've got this large center in New York where we've got 18 treatment rooms here. And because it's still new, you know, people are like, You can do that in Midtown Manhattan? Yes, we have DEA licenses, and ketamine is an FDA-approved medicine. But the future, look, I'm very, very excited about it. Our ambition is to be a multi-site psychedelic wellness center, but not only multi-site, multi-modality. So I envision a time where instead of having 7,500 square feet, ketamine therapy only, I imagine we're almost going to be like a treatment center where we can use, when it's legal, psilocybin for major depressive disorder, MDMA for PTSD. There was a terrific study, a phase 2 study by the company MindMed released this week on LSD for generalized anxiety disorder. So I imagine people will come to Nushama with a very specific psychiatric indication, and we'll have a number of different protocols with a number of different psychedelic molecules, not only in New York City, but all across America. And that's what's very, very exciting for me as somebody whose life has been forever altered by this work, but also as an entrepreneur. It's a very, very exciting space to be in. And I can tell you with conviction, I get up every day with excitement, knowing that there's more people that we're going to help every single day.
Hard to argue with that vibe.
It's a good vibe.
Where can everybody learn more about everything Nushama and you personally, Jay?
Yeah, so Nushama.com, that's Nushama. Our website's a wealth of information, not only about what we do, but about psychedelics in general. So that's amazing. Our Instagram at Nushama Wellness, all one word. Those are probably the best two. But we got some great videos on YouTube as well. And, this is just the beginning. We're not even in the first inning here, guys. And the next 5-10 years is going to be extraordinary for people having alternative and new methods of treating their mood disorders and their psychiatric indications. So there's never been a more exciting time to be in this field.
I love it. And I bet, you probably welcome people flying in and, spending, they're coming to visit New York. They can come see you and do treatment while they're visiting, I assume, correct?
Indeed.
So look at there. You get out, you can make your mind right and visit Manhattan at the same time. So, Jay, we really appreciate your time and flexibility and everything that you're doing with Nushama. Thank you so much for coming on Vibe Science.
Yeah, thank you, Jay.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey, guys, you can find all of the highlight clips and full episode. That is vibesciencepodcast.com. You can find all the links there to Nushama and everything that's happening in this world of psychedelic medicine. For Chris Hansen in Miami, I'm Ryan Alford. We'll see you next time on Vibe Science. The content discussed on this show is provided for reference and educational purposes. The content is not an attempt to practice medicine or provide specific medical advice. Always consult your personal physician for medical advice and proper diagnosis.
Thanks for listening. This is Vibe Science. To learn more or watch full episodes, visit vibesciencepodcast.com. Here's to discovering your highest vibe.